Welcome to LCS Talks. I'm Berkley Glazer, and I'm the principal of Langley Christian Middle School. We have our regulars today. Got Kevin Mirchandani, who's our Director of Instruction. We've got Dave McVety, who is our Therapeutic Counselor. And today's special guest, we have Matthew Price, who is the lead pastor at North Langley Community Church. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. So we would love you to tell us a little bit about your work in Langley in the church context.
Sure.
And I know you did a series called Digitology, which really sounds interesting.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, so I've been at North Langley Community Church for 15 years. I spent the first 5 years as a youth pastor and the last 10 years as a lead pastor. And so, you think through like sermon series and things that you could teach on. And so we're on this journey of becoming apprentice to Jesus. It's the language that Dallas Willard uses. And for discipleship. And so we're just thinking about what it means to follow Jesus, the basics. And just recently we've had this series on the digital age. And, how would Jesus call us to live faithful to him in the digital age?
Awesome.
Yeah.
So Matthew, maybe you could paint a little bit of the theological landscape for us and help us as a Christian community to start to think about how we might engage with technology.
Absolutely. And so I think of three things when I think theologically about the digital age that we're living in. The first thing is creation. So when I go back to Genesis, I just see that God created us to be creators, right? So to actually, we are his pieces of art. We're his workmanship. And I think he loves artists. He loves people who make things. And Genesis 2:15 says, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And so the work in the garden is this beautiful care of the garden. And so as we create technology or digital devices and tools, I think they're used, they are creation itself used to care for creation and to love our neighbor. And so I think digital devices and technology are good things, great tools. And we see that in Genesis. But the second thing I think about is the fall. So in our rebellion, we use digital devices in ways that lead to isolation, that lead to addiction, that lead to death. And I remember when I first laid eyes on some of these things, I had the first iPod ever, the first generation. And I remember playing, Super Mario Brothers as a kid or whatever it was, listening to the internet dial-up sound, when you're waiting to get on the internet. I remember all those moments and they promised us the world, right? Yeah. It was just this is amazing. This is going to change everything. And yet we could have never imagined the polarization, the escapism, the addiction, the bullying, the impact on mental health, and just the new ways in which we created far more complex abilities to sin than previous generations could have dreamed. I think of my grandparents. They're this is kind of sin at a new level. So the first two things is creation, good, right? Mm-hmm. But then also the fall, sin comes in and twists it and complicates it. And one of the images that I really have appreciated is one that St. Augustine used and Martin Luther picked up on it, was this image, this Latin phrase, incurvatus inse. It just is a life curved inwards. And when I look at our digital devices, it just seems like they make a life curve inward and it just cycles inward and downward into self, right? It's all about self. But the life of God is ex curvatus exe. So it's curved outwards. So I'm exposed to his love and I'm exposed to community and to my neighbor. And it's a life that moves upward and outward in circles of greater love and care for others. And so I think the digital world, when it comes to sin, has just created this incurvatus inse, this curving inward. I have a third thought, but any thoughts on that, on creation or sin?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting parts that you've raised here is this idea that we have moved from being co-creators into being consumers. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what that looks like and how we become aware of when we have patterned our lives off of consumerism.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's hard to tell. To be honest, I don't know where the line is, right? Mm-hmm. When I'm using a digital device in just a really healthy way, or it's turned, all of a sudden I'm noticing that it's curving inward. I think in my life, the one way I notice, let's say with social media, is when you play the comparison game, right?
Mm.
And just as a preacher, I notice this with other preachers, right? Even in our city, there's some great preachers, who shall remain nameless, but they're just amazing, right? And they're good at their craft. And so you can compare yourself with other preachers. And so you're online, either it's using YouTube or social media, and you're like, this is getting dark. Like, I'm starting to use this great tool that can get the gospel out to many people to hear it, but now I'm using it to like compare my sermons with another preacher's. So there's there's a line there somewhere, but I don't know where it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a really helpful way to set this up. Is maybe talk to us a little bit more about some of the key passages that emerge for you as you look to technology, and maybe some that you engage with in your conversations with your congregation and some of the learning there.
Totally. So the big one is the rich young ruler, Jesus with the rich young ruler. So someone might be listening to this podcast unfamiliar with the story, but so there's a young man who comes to Jesus. He's wealthy. He seems to be well educated, and he wants life, right? And he asks him for life. But Jesus looks at it's like Jesus has X-ray vision and can look deep into his heart. And he's like, something's not right. Something's not right. This guy, money has become his God, right? That money has a hold on this guy. He's gripped his heart. And so in Mark chapter 10, it says this: Jesus looked at him and loved him. One thing you lack, he said, go sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. But actually the rich young ruler turns away sad. He's unwilling to let go. And I thought this is a perfect story for the digital age because money, you could argue, is money good or is it evil? Well, that's not the right question, is it? Right? Like, it can be used for good and it can be used for evil, like digital tools, right? It could be good, used for good or used for evil. But really, this neutral tool, money, had become an idol in his life. And Jesus wants him to have freedom. He wants him to have life. And he's like, the best thing for you is to get rid of it. Give it to the poor, and then turn and follow me, like turn towards relationship. So at our church, we use that as like, I think, a foundational story for the digital age. Jesus looks at you and loves you. This is not about legalism or, God's anger. No, he looks at you and loves you, but he sees that this thing, what is it? Social media, your smartphone, the internet, what's going on? It is now taken over. And he's calling you to drop it, to turn, and to follow him. And just as a side note, it's been really cool to see people do that. Hey, I've taken social media off my phone. Hey, I've got a flip phone. Hey, whatever it is, like it's just like, I want to follow Jesus. And so anyway.
Yeah, those are great examples. I was even thinking of conversations I've had in my life group of creative things that we've done. Like, we've set our phones to go off at a certain time. Some have put up little baskets that they put their phone into when they walk in. So the strategies and the practices are limitless in terms of what we can do to be able to thrive. And so, I guess what I'm wondering here is a little bit of some of the challenges. How do we work through them? How do we put technology in its rightful place? What do we do to think about technology in light of some of the challenges that communities are facing in terms of being able to actually fully experience God's abundant life?
Yeah, so I would say like a huge thing here, and feel free to lean in if you guys have extra ideas here, but a big thing for me is just thinking about wisdom, right? And I wonder if here at LCS, this is really important, that we're moving away from conversations about legalism and law to conversations about wisdom. So in the digital age, like I said with the rich young ruler, is this a good thing or is it all evil? And no, that's the wrong question. What we're trying to get at is, how do let's move away from a conversation on law, and to move towards a conversation around wisdom. And I feel like students would love that, right? Like, they would love, okay, don't just tell me my cell phone is evil. Like, I know I'm looking at it a lot, right? But just don't tell me it's evil, but show me how to use this. Like, how do I use this? Because cell phones, are not just going to, immediately disappear. So I have to learn to use this the best way possible in a complex world. So it's a tool. So I wonder if engaging students with conversations around wisdom, this is a tool. How do I use this tool? How do I use it in the best way that leads to human flourishing? Or how do I use this tool in a way that allows me to love God and love my neighbor? I feel like that kind of conversation, I I think, you guys could correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like students would love to be part of that. They would have ideas. I mean, one thing I heard from a teenager that shared at our church was the language she used was like, don't make it kind of the source of everything that's bad in my life, right? Because sometimes when you take away my phone, you're actually taking away a link to community. And sometimes it's not the phone that's wrong. That's what's wrong with me, right? There's some other things going on. So see beyond the phone. And I was like, whoa, that's a really good thing that a teenager is saying to adults, like, look beyond the phone here. There might be some deeper things. So anyway, a conversation on wisdom.
It's good. I love it. I mean, I think that falls in line with our concept of digital citizenship, is teaching them wisdom and how to utilize technology for good things and not to let it get carried away, not to get swept away by whatever, wave is coming at you and just let it control you. It's tricky though. We end up landing sometimes on the rules. Nope, no cell phones at school. Why? Because.
Yeah, no social media till you're 13.
Why?
Because.
That's right. That's right.
And so there's not enough tangible understanding, but there is.
Yeah.
We just sometimes don't share it or don't speak it out or let them process it with us.
Totally.
Or we forget to. We started processing, and it got lost in the shuffle 4 years later. It's still just a rule now instead of the why.
Yeah.
But there's deep reason and rationale for the wisdom there.
Totally.
That we've implemented, but keeping it front and center is huge for kids.
Can I be vulnerable with a little bit of my story here?
Yeah,
sure.
So it's interesting. When I think about wisdom, I think about my own life story where for many years, for about 8 years, I was addicted to pornography, primarily through a laptop. And for me, like if you were to ask me before the year 2006, which was the year that I feel like God brought like this freedom into my life. It was a very powerful story, but for another time. But like before 2006, I would say the internet and the laptop are wrong and evil, right? And the irony is that we're talking here and podcast listeners can't see it, but I have my laptop right in the middle of the table here. And I use the internet this morning to help me put some thoughts together, right? So now I'm using the laptop and the internet, hopefully in a way that is allowing me to love my neighbor. And so again, so laptop and internet, not just evil, it's how do I use it? And I love that, just this idea of explaining the why behind it. Why is it? Because for me, the rich young ruler, Jesus looked at me and loved me. And in 2006 said, you actually need to step away from your laptop and the internet. And I had some strict rules around when to be on the laptop. And as the years went on, and years, not just months, years went on, I slowly started to figure out new ways of good habits around the internet and the laptop to the point where today I can use it. But I feel like a teenager would just like love that conversation, like, okay, let's talk about this. Sometimes I got to have a flip phone because the porn on my, or the comparison games I'm playing or the addiction to things and buying things or whatever it is. I mean, it could be something as simple as Facebook Marketplace. Like the amount of people I talk to who are on Facebook Marketplace for hours, right? It's just like, okay, is this healthy? Maybe Jesus is telling you to just put that down, turn and follow him. And anyway.
Well, that's really helpful. I mean, in terms of taking time to be honest with ourselves, and we really appreciate you sharing part of your story. And I think a really important part is just being willing to have these conversations as a family, to sit down and to bring the private into the public, open, transparent, and honest kind of space. And that's often where good questions are asked, where learning takes place, where we're invited into not just partial spiritual formation, but whole life kind of flourishing that Jesus can enter into. And so I think you've really invited us to think about what this means for us as families and with our listeners who are maybe a little bit hesitant to have these conversations with their kids. Any encouragement in terms of how you might approach these conversations? Are you having these conversations with your own family, and what does that look like?
Oh, it's a good question. And so this is where I hope maybe you guys can help me too. When I'm thinking about my children, so I'm just going to come at this as a father. One of the things that I want for my kids is that they would notice that things like social media, just to use as an example, it's a great front door, but not a great kitchen or living room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an image that I'm pulling from an author named Jay Kim. He wrote a book called Analog Church. And he says, just think about something like social media. So when I'm thinking about my kids, I want them to know, like the good front door of a home, it's the place of instant connection. Hey, how have you been? Haven't seen you in forever. Hey, let's get together, have a coffee, have a whatever. It's a great front door, but where does the real living happen in a home? It happens like in the living room, or for actually many of us in the kitchen, right? It's like when people become vulnerable and tears are shed, and it's like where the real living happens. So if you use that as a metaphor, social media is only able to deliver a great front door experience, right? It cannot be for you the kitchen or the living room. So I would want my kids to be in a school setting, a church setting, and in our own family where, hey, we're using digital tools as a great front door. But I would hope that they would have deeper relationships outside of social media. So how could we foster that? One other, so that's one point. But the second thing, I was just thinking about schooling, and I thought, just this idea of a school teaching children about digital identity, like online. And you guys use the phrase digital citizen. Okay.
Digital citizenship.
I love that. That kids would like learn what it means to be a digital citizen. I think that's beautiful. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a program that we started, probably over 10 years ago. And it came out of the necessity of navigating these waters with our kiddos that are just jumping too prematurely online and not having the tools to navigate that well at all. And then about 6 years ago, when the new BC curriculum came out, we were really hoping that there was going to be this big emphasis on digital citizenship. We call it good digital citizenship, but anything on digital citizenship, but it was lacking. It was just gone. It wasn't there either. So we went, all right, we got to continue this. And so we developed, the pillars of digital citizenship, where we talk about everything from how do you stay safe on the internet, what does it look like to be having good etiquette when you're online, to trying to develop a healthy maturity line of when is it appropriate to use social media, when not. Like legally, they say you got to be 13. There's a reason for that. And are you lying at 11 to say about your age? And then what's that creating? What kind of culture are we creating there? Are we liars as Christians, or are we being honest and truthful? And there's reasons why we want to allow you to navigate that successfully, but we got to give you some tools in the meantime to get there.
Amazing.
And I think what stands out to me about that concept, like where do we start when it comes to being good digital citizens, is we start with ourself. Teachers or parents, it doesn't matter which kind of lens you're looking through, but I can't teach my child to drive a car unless I drive it appropriately. Right. And so there comes into that like an example that we're called to live. Show them what it means to be good digital citizens, and be willing to receive questions and correction.
Yeah.
Like humility, right? My kids see me. You're always on your phone. I am not. But that's what they see. So I need to stop arguing and get less defensive. Say, okay, what is it they see? And what am I doing with my phone that creates that belief or that perception in them? And maybe they're right. And honestly, even if they're not right, if that's what they see, that's what matters. And so there's a real need for a willingness to receive, just like the rich young ruler, right? He would not receive the love offered. If we receive it as love and there's perception from others around us, then our kids hopefully will receive it as love too, rather than judgment and rule and law. And so we need to be able to check ourselves and listen to others around us, and then offer that same thing to students by example. I remember my story I used to tell. My little guy was like 2 years old, and when I eat popcorn, the kernels, I don't like the kernels, the little pieces of the shell. Yeah. So I would spit them out in the living room carpet. Yeah, I know. Bad, right? I'm like, dude. And my wife comes home one day. She's watching us eat popcorn. And she watches my 2-year-old wander around the room, spitting chunks of popcorn all over the carpet. Right? Yeah. So whatever I do, first of all, she was upset, realized it was me. We dealt with it. Anyway,
you're still married.
Whatever I do, my kids magnify. and they misinterpret or they don't see the way I intend. And so I have to be super careful, recognizing what they're seeing rather than getting defensive. And that'll create, hopefully, that same posture of humility in them.
Yeah, that's good.
My wife and I have one of those books where we keep track of our kids' funny things that they say. And so I don't have it in front of me here, but an excerpt from the last couple of weeks. I'm coming home and I've told my son, hey, I'm putting my phone away. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it in a little bit. And after not putting it away for 5 minutes, my son looks at me and says, Dad, I really wish you would do what you say you do. Oh. And so that one's going in the book. That was one of the ones of knowing what we know and following through. And I think that's really important with our kids, that we're consistent, that we actually recognize that the way that we pattern our lives around technology or use technology as a tool really helps us to be able to thrive. And so inviting our kids, I'm speaking as a parent of young kids and thinking about how do I want technology to be present in our household and having those conversations. I mean, my 3-year-old knowing what the phone is and sometimes pretending to call me to talk to me when I'm not talking to him, and that being a lifeline to connect, that speaks a lot of what kids understand from a really young age. So this has been a really helpful way for us to think about it, to think about technology and its presence in our community as we continue to learn and grow. Over to Berkley. I think you had one more question.
Well, I think we kind of jumped into that, but that's all right. I just wanted to have a round table for the last question here where we each get to share. How do we support our learners as we strive to become good stewards of technology? And for us at school, it's about education, right? But more so than that, of course, we're teaching them the life skills as well. But so how do we support learners as we try to be good stewards of that? That's a question round table. And I know as a principal, Matthew, I loved your analogy of curving inward and that how problematic that is when kids or people just see technology as just creating this funnel of downward and just looking introverted. And I love the example of Christ calling us to be extroverted and to show God's love outward. And so as a principal and us, like for us, I start with 11-year-olds, and in my school it goes 11 to 14-year-olds. That's grade 6, 7, 8. So how do I guide them to spin that around so they're not the introverted, but they're the extroverted? So you've created that thought in me, and I'm going to keep processing that and getting teachers to reflect on that and try to find ways to turn that around so it is seen as something positive rather than negative.
Totally. Yeah. The image that I get when I think of the inward outward is kind of like this funnel cloud, right? Yeah. And you almost cut that funnel cloud in half, and the half is like neutral. Mm. And then the more narrow and downward you go, the more inward it is. And that kind of speaks to your thing about consumerism almost. Like, you're a consumer when you're just thinking about yourself. Mm-hmm. And teaching kids to discern, all right, and almost like drawing that on a whiteboard and having different characteristics that come along with an expanding circle and drawing them in that. And then what are the characteristics that show and indicate that you're going inward? Selfishness, focus, comparison, all these negative things, disconnect, lack of concern maybe for how others are responding or feeling when you say or treat them in a certain way, as compared to the outward, which is to envelop them and to care how they feel, to walk with them, to focus on Jesus and relationship. And so I don't know if that's what the image was for, but that's what I picture in my head drawing it, and even being able to spell it out so they can start to discern for themselves when it's no longer good digital citizenship.
Yeah, you really invited us with your own honesty to go into uncharted territory where we can be formed to look more like Christ. And so, yeah, I'm just grateful for opportunity for me to reflect with my own family, for us to engage with staff members, to think about their digital footprint and what we think about citizenship and how we're engaging in learning together. So yeah, for me, the takeaway is just the importance of having these conversations and being willing to say technology put in its rightful place means that there isn't a set of do's and don'ts. There is a continuous process of learning, of discernment, of asking the questions about how I am being formed or not being formed to be more like Christ. And so those are questions that you've left me with, and I'm grateful for.
Yeah, I'm excited to engage with the whys with some kids. We don't do phones because we want to be a living room where there's real life here.
Yeah.
We interact with each other face to face. We don't want to shut down your continued connection past this place, even if it's digital, but we want to make sure we focus on the living room.
Yeah, that's
and don't get stuck in the foyer.
Yeah, I wanted to encourage you guys because we have an LCS student that goes to our church, and she was just reflecting on the series we went through as a church on the digital age and following Jesus. And she was thinking about her time here at Langley Christian, and she was very thankful because you do have a cell phone policy where she has not been able to use her cell phone in the hallways and in class and stuff like that. And she realized that there's a big difference between her high school experience and the high school experience of some of her peers just down the road here in our city, who are at a pretty big public school, and they're on their phones all the time in class, in the hallways. And she said what it's done at LCS is it's made her look like, she said, when I need to find my friends, I have to run around the halls to find them. Like, I can't just text them. I have to be like, where are they? And then you plan on getting together and you're actually having face-to-face conversations or whatever it was. She was just reflecting on that, just that principle has been very helpful. And so I just want to encourage you guys. You already have a high school student who's already thankful for your cell phone policy. And yeah, explaining a deeper why is probably helpful, but I just want you to know it has made an impact. And so I'm grateful for schools like Langley Christian that are kind of taking those moments to say, hey, cell phones aren't evil. It's just, this is not a space for that currently. and teaching them how to be digital citizens. I think that's a double win.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Matthew. We've just so appreciated you engaging with us today. Gave us lots of food for thought. We're even going to be revamping our digital citizenship program a little bit to talk about the whys and wisdom. I love that. So thanks, listeners, for being with us today, and stay tuned. More to come.